The performance by Carrie Fisher, who of course is no longer with us, but you managed to bring her back to close out this character and close out this series in what I thought was a pretty moving way and an extraordinarily complex way, I'm sure. I wondered if we could talk about the process of bringing her back, how the editing factored into that, how the visual effects factored into that, how the sound design factored into that. I know you had footage of her that you used from The Force Awakens, but what shape was that in, and how did you adjust it for what we saw on the screen tonight?
Well, I'll start, and then you guys should take it and run. Before we started writing, we knew that Leia had to be part of the story. You couldn't tell the end of the Skywalker saga without Leia. We weren't going to recast. We couldn't do a CG character. We looked at the footage we had not used in The Force Awakens, and we realized we had a number of shots that we could actually use. So it was a bit like having, a dozen pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and then having to make pieces around it and paint, create an image, a cohesive image from these separate pieces. And so obviously, I knew Carrie for a little bit for a long time before we worked together on Force Awakens. Obviously, we all loved her, and we're heartsick that she wasn't there. And yet we knew the character had to be. So we started by looking at what these shots were. We started writing scenes around these shots, completely new contexts, new locations, new situation. And we did a test, but it was really like, will this work? Let's just try this. And the one thing I'll say is that whenever you see Carrie, even, by the way, in the flashback, when you see her face, like even those shots, the Luke and the Leia shots, we completely constructed, composed the shots, those pieces around the original pieces that we had. And I will say one more thing, and then I'll shut up, which is that the real, credit also needs to be given to someone who's not here, Daisy Ridley, who is, I think, extraordinary in the movie. But in these scenes with Leia, I was watching her off camera on the set, because we were shooting the other side of the scene, and there she was, acting with Carrie in a way that made me believe it, looking at the monitor. And I thought, if we can pull this off, which with these people I knew we could, Daisy was the one who was selling it in a way that really made me hopeful on the set.
What was there for her? Were you playing the audio?
We were showing her the piece that we had, which of course had not been changed or affected. We had a double there, so there was so much for her to look at, but it was something that was, completely, almost the way I always look back at from, certainly New Hope, in the scenes with Mark, with Luke, and the droids, and, the credit that he should get for selling these droids. I mean, he was extraordinary in those scenes, making us all believe that those droids were, were alive and real. So anyway, there was something amazing even on the set that was moving, that I didn't expect. And part of it was that we were all part of this sort of illusion of keeping Leia alive in the film.
In the flashback scene, were those their real faces too, or were those digital simulations?
Those are completely their faces. And Roger can talk to how we did that, but we took faces from the original dailies from the early films. But
can you talk about that, Roger?
Yeah. I mean, it was, as JJ said, just a massive jigsaw puzzle of putting all these pieces together. And obviously what we were really aiming to, or when you watch the movie, you just want to believe that Carrie's there, and it's just completely natural within the scene. And basing it around, obviously, the performances that she'd given us previously was the key. And then, of course, we had to stage the scenes and create those shots. And I would say it was an incredibly difficult thing to do. I mean, it is immensely difficult and required a tremendous amount of planning to the nth degree to make this work. I mean, the absolute detail of it. We often use motion control. You'll notice that she has a different hairstyle. She's wearing a different wardrobe. I mean, all of those things. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do.
Is that a double, or is that simulated, or how did you?
I don't know whether we want to give away all the secrets of what we did. I mean, partially, but I think we want to have a moment here where we just sort of enjoy her in the movie, and it required an immense amount of planning, and it obviously, it just wasn't that. It wasn't an easy thing to do at all, and required a tremendous number of people to pull it off. But I think when you watch the movie, hopefully you're seeing Carrie, and we obviously wanted to respect the integrity of her performance in every one of those pieces.
One little thing that comes to mind as you're saying this, and it's sort of completely not off topic, but it's a weird sort of tangential thing. I'm just reminded of Albert Whitlock, the great map painter, and he would know where your focus was. And if you look at the work, you see the incredible detail and the light he would use in his paintings, and the other stuff he knew you would see, but it wasn't what you were focusing on. Despite every frame, I think, being kind of exactly perfect, and there was no area that was sort of more focused on, but the thing that you did that was so extraordinary in making it look as easy as it does is make sure that we were adhering to Carrie and her performance, so that thing was what everything followed.
Yeah, and it is a classic visual effect. I mean, it's a sleight of hand, and of course, JJ's massive interest in magic. I always thought of that when we were doing these shots, was that, everyone's looking at her face, and that was the thing that we held on to, and then we fixed everything else. And that was the difficult thing. But of course, when you think about it, all the footage that we were using was quite often lit in different ways. We had to be really careful about, and the key to it as well, to me, was that you couldn't just cut to her in a single shot every time. You wanted her to be part of the scene, and you wanted her to integrate into that moment, because if she'd been there, you wouldn't have just been cutting to her every time. You would have been moving the camera, you would have been, doing all these things, and she would have been hugging people, for example, which, all of the things that she does in this movie. And that's what was really complicated. And real credit to Daisy for sticking with it. And it required a tremendous amount of patience. And I think, we had a few moments where, sometimes we were exterior and we're trying to shoot shots in the right light. We had to match the light every time, it was very complicated.
One little teeny thing also I'm thinking is that in that moment where she gives her the saber and when she says, nothing's impossible, and then Rey says nothing's impossible, those kind of handshakes as much as we could, whether it was, Leia walking in front of Rey, whether it was her handing her something, whether it was a moment of dialogue, anything we could do to not have it feel like it was sort of like a binary thing, that it felt like it was an interaction was important.
Yeah, but I mean, she has a different costume, she has a different hairstyle, she's wearing different jewelry, and that was part of the thing about it too. We didn't want it to look as though we'd taken footage from another movie and used it. We wanted it to look as though it was really part of this one.
Carrie, I remember in an interview